Andrei Romanovich Chikatilo, a name that still sends shivers down the spine of anyone who has ever heard the story. In the late Soviet Union, at a time when the authorities officially denied the very existence of serial killers, he became the nightmare of Rostov and the surrounding regions. Known as the Rostov Butcher or the Red Ripper, Chikatilo murdered more than 50 innocent people over more than a decade. But to understand how such a monster came to exist, we must first go back to the very beginning, to his childhood. Chikatilo was born in 1936 in a small Ukrainian village at the height of famine and political terror. His parents were poor peasants. His father drafted into the Red Army during World War II, while young Andrei grew up hungry, weak, and constantly afraid. The stories of that era are terrifying. It is said that his older brother disappeared and may have been cannibalized by starving neighbors. Whether true or not, such tales left a lasting scar on the boy's mind. At school, he was bright, a good student, but he was also mocked by his classmates. He was shy, often bullied, and suffered from health problems, including poor vision and sexual dysfunction. These humiliations shaped his inner world, pushing him toward isolation and creating the frustration that would later erupt in horrific ways. Despite all this, on the surface, Chikatilo appeared like any other Soviet man. He studied, worked as a teacher, and eventually married and had 2 children. His colleagues saw him as strict, perhaps odd, but respectable. Nobody imagined that beneath the mask of a quiet intellectual was a man hiding uncontrollable urges. By the late 1970s, those urges had grown too strong. In 1978, Chikatilo lured a 9-year-old girl into the woods and killed her. It was the beginning of a series of murders that would paralyze the Rostov region for over a decade. Children, teenagers, women. His victims were vulnerable, and he targeted them in places where he could easily approach without suspicion. Train stations, markets, bus stops, and parks. He offered small gifts, food, or promises of help. Then he struck with unimaginable violence. At first, investigators refused to believe they were dealing with a serial killer. The Soviet ideology did not allow such things to exist in their perfect society. But the bodies kept appearing, and while the authorities searched for explanations, Andrei Chikatilo continued his hunt, perfecting his double life as family man and predator. By the early 1980s, the crimes of Andrei Chikatilo had reached a terrifying scale. Entire regions lived in fear. Parents were afraid to let their children walk to school. Women avoided traveling alone. Yet despite the growing number of victims, the authorities struggled to find the killer. One of the most disturbing aspects of the case was the failure of the Soviet system to recognize the reality of a serial murderer. In a society that prided itself on order and control, acknowledging the existence of a predator who killed at random was politically inconvenient. The investigation, known as Operation Forest Path, became one of the largest in Soviet history. Hundreds of detectives, thousands of police officers, and countless volunteers combed the woods, the train stations, and the highways around Rostov. Psychological profilers, a relatively new tool in criminology, described the killer as an intelligent but socially awkward man, likely educated and employed in a respectable profession. Ironically, this description fit Chikatilo perfectly, yet he continued to slip through their fingers. At one point, the pressure to solve the case led to tragic mistakes. In 1983, authorities arrested and even executed an innocent man who was accused of the murders. The real killer was still free, watching the news and learning how to improve his methods. This mistake not only cost an innocent life, but also allowed Chikatilo to continue killing without fear of discovery. Chikatilo's double life became increasingly chilling. To his family, he was distant but ordinary. A husband and father who read books, graded papers, and went to work. To his colleagues, he was strict, eccentric, but not dangerous. And yet, late at night, he transformed into a predator. He roamed bus stations, lured teenagers with promises of food or money, and struck in isolated places. His crimes grew more frequent and more brutal. What puzzled investigators was his ability to evade suspicion. He was once even questioned, but released due to lack of evidence. On another occasion, he was seen near the site of an abduction, but his calm and educated demeanor convinced the police he could not be the killer. Chikatilo used the Soviet system's flaws against itself. The very image of a proper citizen became his camouflage. By the mid-1980s, the body count rose dramatically. Parents whispered horror stories at night. Newspapers avoided the subject, but rumors spread like wildfire. Some believed it was the work of a satanic cult. Others blamed escaped psychiatric patients. Few could imagine that the monster was an ordinary man, teaching in schools, sitting quietly at dinner tables, and riding the same buses as everyone else. The end of Chikatilo's reign of terror finally came in the late 1980s and early 1990s. Investigators, learning from their earlier mistakes, began to narrow their focus. They realized that the killer often struck near train stations and bus stops, and so plainclothes officers were assigned to monitor these areas around the clock. One day in 1990, a suspicious man was spotted watching children near a Rostov station. He was stopped, questioned, and searched. That man was Andrei Chikatilo. At first, he tried to deny everything, but evidence began to pile up. Items belonging to victims were found in his possession. Witnesses remembered him near abduction sites. After long interrogations, Chikatilo eventually confessed to dozens of murders. His confession was chilling not only for its details, but for the calm, almost casual way he described the acts. He spoke as if he were describing someone else's story, not his own. The trial of Andrei Chikatilo became one of the most infamous in modern Russian history. Held in 1992, it was a spectacle that shocked the nation and the world. Inside the courtroom, Chikatilo was kept in an iron cage to prevent attacks from enraged family members of the victims. He screamed, sang, and made bizarre gestures, trying to appear insane. But psychological experts declared him sane and fully responsible for his actions. The relatives of the victims cried out in anger as he recounted his crimes. The press covered every moment. For many, it was the first time they had ever heard of such a thing happening in their country. The illusion that monsters only exist in the West was shattered. In 1994, the verdict was carried out. The Rostov Butcher was executed with a single shot to the back of the head. Andrei Chikatilo's story remains one of the darkest chapters of the 20th century. It is a reminder of how evil can hide behind the most ordinary mask. A man who looked like a strict teacher, a father, a husband, but inside carried unimaginable cruelty. His case also revealed the failures of a system that refused to admit the existence of serial killers, allowing him to claim far more victims than he might have otherwise. Today, his name is synonymous with fear, and his crimes are studied by criminologists, psychologists, and law enforcement agencies around the world. The question remains, how many other monsters hide behind ordinary faces? And can society ever truly protect itself against evil when it refuses to see it?